She looked at me with a half-smile and said, "You're just a kid." But the way her hand lingered on the doorframe told me she didn't really want me to leave. I wasn't expecting anything unusual that afternoon. It was just another quiet day in the building, the kind where the sound of distant footsteps in the stairwell becomes the loudest distraction. But when the delivery man dropped a package at my door, a name and apartment number that wasn't mine, I figured I'd do the polite thing and return it. Her apartment was just across the hall. I'd seen her in passing before, a glimpse in the elevator, a polite nod in the parking lot. Always put together, always a little untouchable. But this time, I was standing at her door, package in hand, heartbeat oddly louder than it needed to be. I knocked. A pause followed, and then the sound of the lock sliding open. The door eased back, and there she was. Not the polished, composed version I'd glimpsed before, but something softer. Her hair was loose, falling just past her shoulders. Behind her, the glow of warm light spilled from a lamp, casting the apartment in a golden hush. She wore a simple cardigan, sleeves pushed halfway up, like I'd caught her in a rare moment of ease. Her eyes landed on me, and for a moment she seemed caught off guard. Then her lips curved slightly, not a smile exactly, more like the trace of one she was trying to suppress. "You're just a kid," she said, voice low, almost to herself. I should have laughed it off, handed her the package, and left. But the way she said it, like she was trying to convince herself more than me, made me stay rooted where I was. "If that's true," I said quietly, tilting my head, "then why did you open the door for me?" For a second, her composure faltered. Her eyes flicked to the package in my hands, then back to my face. She reached forward, fingers brushing against mine as she took it. The contact was brief, barely more than a touch, but it sent a quiet jolt through me. Her skin was warm, softer than I'd expected. She drew back quickly, clutching the box against her chest. A small breath escaped her lips, as though the air in the hallway had grown heavier. "Thank you," she said, the words polite but laced with something quieter, a hesitation, a curiosity she didn't voice. I nodded, stepping back slowly, but even as the door began to close, I caught the faintest trace of her eyes lingering on me. And in that lingering glance, I realized something I shouldn't have felt so soon. This wasn't going to be just a neighborly exchange. A few days passed before I saw her again. I wasn't looking for her, not really. But every time I stepped into the hallway, I caught myself glancing at her door, as if expecting it to open at the right moment. And one evening, it did. She was standing there, keys in hand, about to lock up. I almost walked past, but something in me slowed. "Evening," I said, my voice carrying more steadiness than I actually felt. She turned, pausing mid-motion. Her expression softened for a heartbeat before she covered it with a faint smile. "Evening." There was a quiet pull in the air, as if the walls between us had thinned since that first encounter. She leaned against her doorframe, folding her arms across her chest in that way people do when they're trying to appear casual, though the way her eyes held mine told me she wasn't as indifferent as she wanted to seem. I smirked slightly, recalling her words from before. "You know," I said, "last time you called me just a kid." Her brows lifted, and her lips curved with a small, restrained laugh. "I did." "Then why," I asked, letting the words hang in the narrow space between us, "did you open the door for me?" For a moment she didn't answer. Her gaze flickered, not with annoyance but with something more fragile, like I'd touched a thought she didn't want to admit out loud. Then, almost reluctantly, the corner of her mouth lifted. "Maybe I was being polite." "Maybe," I said, stepping a fraction closer, though still careful to keep the distance respectful. "But politeness usually doesn't linger in someone's eyes the way it did in yours." She shook her head, amused, though her smile didn't fade. And in that moment, I noticed how her hand, resting lightly on the wooden frame of her door, didn't move. She stayed there, as if anchoring herself, or maybe keeping herself from stepping away. The hallway was silent except for the low hum of the building's lights. Yet it felt like a quiet stage where every tilt of her head, every pause in her breath, became part of an unspoken conversation. Finally, she straightened, pulling her arms tighter around herself. "You're bold," she said, not unkindly. "Only when the door's already open," I replied softly. Her eyes lingered on me one last time, a silent admission she wouldn't voice, before she turned the key and slipped inside. And though the door closed, the quiet pull between us didn't. It followed me all the way back to my apartment, settling somewhere deep in my chest. The rain had started just after sunset. Heavy, steady, the kind that soaks the air and makes the whole building feel wrapped in a blanket of sound. I'd made myself a fresh pot of coffee, the rich scent filling my small kitchen, when I thought of her. Her apartment was only a wall away. I imagined her sitting alone, listening to the same rain. The thought lingered long enough that I poured a second cup. Before I could second-guess myself, I knocked gently on her door. She opened it slowly, surprised to see me standing there with 2 steaming mugs. "It's raining too beautifully to drink coffee alone," I said, trying not to sound rehearsed. "Would you join me?" Her first instinct was hesitation. I could see it in the way her lips parted, the way she glanced at the cup in my hand before meeting my eyes again. But then something softened. She gave a quiet nod. "Just for a little while." She followed me inside, her presence filling my small space more than I expected. We sat across from each other at the table, the rain tapping a steady rhythm against the window. The glow of the overhead light caught in her hair, making her look somehow both elegant and undone at once. I slid her the cup. Her fingers brushed mine again as she took it, this time not pulling back so quickly. She wrapped her hands around the warmth, holding it as though it were something more than coffee, maybe an excuse to stay. For a while, we just listened to the rain. Then she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "I don't usually let neighbors in. Boundaries keep life simple." I nodded, careful not to break the fragile honesty she'd offered. "I get that. But sometimes simple can be lonely." Her eyes lifted to mine, searching, almost questioning. She sipped her coffee, and I swear the smallest smile touched her lips. "Maybe you're right." The minutes slipped by unnoticed, the rain carrying us along. She talked about her long workdays, about how she rarely had time to stop and just be. I listened, captivated not just by her words but by the way she let them fall, unguarded, real. And when her laughter broke through once, soft and unexpected, it felt like the room itself leaned closer. By the time she set her empty cup down, I knew this wasn't just about coffee. It was about the space between us shrinking, one slow breath at a time. When the clock edged toward midnight, she finally rose from the table. The rain outside had softened into a steady drizzle, the sound no longer demanding attention but folding quietly into the background. "I should go," she said, though her voice didn't sound entirely convinced. I stood with her, walking the few steps to the door. The hallway beyond looked dim and still, as if the world outside my apartment had been holding its breath. She lingered at the threshold, one hand resting lightly against the frame. Neither of us seemed eager to break the moment. For a long beat, she stayed silent, her gaze lowering as though weighing something. Then, almost too softly, she admitted, "It's hard letting people close. They usually want something." The words hung between us, fragile as glass. I felt the weight of them, the quiet ache that hid behind her composed exterior. She wasn't just speaking about neighbors or casual friendships, she was speaking about her life. I leaned against the wall near her, careful to give her space yet unwilling to let the truth of her words slip past unnoticed. "Maybe," I said gently, "but sometimes, people just want to be near someone who makes them feel at ease." Her eyes lifted, meeting mine. For once, she didn't shield them with humor or hesitation. She just looked, searching, as if testing whether my words carried weight or were only the easy promises she'd learned to distrust. And then, in a gesture so natural it almost startled me, she reached forward. Her fingers brushed against my collar, straightening it like I was someone she'd known far longer than I had any right to expect. The touch was small, but it lingered, her knuckles grazing the fabric near my neck, close enough for me to feel the faint warmth of her hand. Her breath caught when she realized, and she drew back quickly, folding her arms as if to erase the moment. But she couldn't erase the look in her eyes, a flicker of something vulnerable, something human and unguarded. I smiled softly, not pushing, not demanding. Just letting her see that I noticed. That I valued the small fracture in her armor. She shook her head, almost laughing at herself. "Good night," she whispered, retreating into the safety of her apartment. The door clicked shut, but I didn't feel rejected. Not this time. Because in that fleeting, tender touch, I'd felt her guard slip, and I knew she'd felt it too. The days that followed felt heavier than they should have. The sound of rain had given way to clear skies, but the quiet in the hallway outside my apartment lingered like a weight. I hadn't seen her since that night at the threshold. No soft smiles, no accidental glances. Just silence. By the third evening, I gave in. I found myself standing outside her door, hand lifted to knock before I could talk myself out of it. For a moment, I wondered if she'd even answer. Then, slowly, the door opened. She stood there, composed as ever, though there was a tiredness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Hi," I said carefully. "I just wanted to, you shouldn't be here," she interrupted, her voice firmer than I expected. The words cut sharper than I'd imagined, though she wasn't cruel. It was the way she said it, as if she were trying to protect us both from something neither of us could name. "Better if we don't talk much," she added, her hand resting against the edge of the door, ready to close it. I swallowed back the instinct to argue. Instead, I searched her face, and for just a second, I caught it, that flicker of hesitation in her eyes, the quiet contradiction her words couldn't hide. She wasn't pushing me away because she didn't care. She was pushing me away because she did. I nodded slowly. "If that's what you want," I said, though my voice cracked just enough to betray the truth, that it wasn't what I wanted at all. She pressed her lips together, the smallest wince flashing across her face, before she pulled the door nearly shut. Nearly. Long enough for me to feel the weight of her indecision, long enough for me to see the shadow of her silhouette lingering on the other side even after it closed. Back in my apartment, the silence pressed harder than before. The room felt colder without her laughter echoing in it, the space emptier without her hands wrapped around a coffee cup across from me. And yet, even in the quiet, my mind replayed her touch on my collar, the warmth of her fingers brushing mine over coffee, the way her gaze lingered 1 second too long before she pulled away. It wasn't rejection. It was fear. And that, somehow, hurt more than if she'd truly wanted nothing to do with me. It was late when the storm hit. Heavy winds rattled the windows, and then, without warning, the building went dark. The hum of the lights, the steady buzz of appliances, all of it silenced in an instant. I lit a candle and sat with the flicker for company, the shadows stretching long against the walls. A knock startled me. 3 soft taps, hesitant but unmistakable. When I opened the door, she was there, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, a single candle in her hand. "Power's out," she said, her voice carrying a wry edge to hide the vulnerability beneath. "Mind if I wait here until it's back?" I stepped aside without a word, and she slipped in. The glow of our candles mingled, throwing amber light across her features. She looked different in the dimness, softer, almost fragile, though still carrying that quiet strength I'd come to recognize. We sat together at the table, shadows dancing around us. For a while, the storm outside did the talking. Then she laughed, sudden and unguarded, when the candle flame sputtered with a gust of air. The sound eased the tightness in my chest, reminding me of the warmth I'd been missing. "I've been avoiding you," she admitted after a pause, her fingers tracing idle circles along the wooden tabletop. "Not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid of how natural this feels." Her honesty pulled something loose inside me. I leaned forward, voice steady though my heart raced. "Then stop fighting what's real." Her eyes lifted to mine. In that moment, the storm seemed far away, the darkness outside irrelevant. What mattered was the silence that stretched between us, charged with something neither of us could deny. Slowly, almost as if testing her own resolve, she reached across the table. Her hand found mine, warm and hesitant. I turned my palm upward, letting her fingers slide into the spaces between mine. The fit was too easy, too certain to dismiss as chance. The flickering light painted her in shades of gold, her gaze soft but unflinching now. I could feel the unspoken question in her touch, the tremor of someone stepping into territory she swore she'd never cross. I squeezed her hand gently, an answer without words. And in that fragile, flickering glow, it no longer felt like something forbidden. It felt inevitable. By morning, the storm had passed. The building hummed back to life, light spilling softly through the blinds. She was still there, seated at my table, sipping the last of the coffee I'd brewed once the power returned. For a moment, I just watched her. The way the sunlight caught in her hair, the way her posture had softened overnight. She looked less like the guarded neighbor who'd once shut me out, and more like someone who had finally allowed herself to exhale. When she set the mug down, our eyes met. No hesitation this time. "I should probably get back to my place," she said gently, though her tone carried no urgency. I walked her to the door, the hallway now quiet and bathed in early light. We stood there longer than necessary, both reluctant to let the night's closeness slip into memory. At the threshold, she turned to me, her expression thoughtful. Then, with a tenderness that caught me off guard, she lifted her hand and cupped my cheek. Her palm was warm, her thumb brushing lightly against my skin as though she were memorizing the shape of me. "Maybe you're not such a kid after all," she whispered, her voice carrying a quiet certainty. I felt a smile tug at my lips. "Then maybe you should stop closing the door on me." For the first time since I'd known her, she laughed without restraint, soft, genuine, and filled with something that sounded dangerously close to relief. She stepped into me then, her arms sliding around my waist, drawing me close. Her cheek rested against my chest, and I felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat through the thin fabric of my shirt. Without thinking, my arms folded around her, holding her as though she belonged in that space all along. Time seemed to slow in that hallway. The faint hum of the building, the distant sound of a neighbor's door shutting, the warmth of her body pressed into mine, all of it wove together into a moment I knew I'd carry with me. When she finally pulled back, her hand lingered on mine at her waist. She didn't retreat behind her walls this time. Instead, she left the door slightly ajar as she stepped into her apartment, glancing back at me with a look that said everything she hadn't voiced aloud. The door wasn't closed anymore. Not between us. Not after last night. And for the first time, it felt like this story was only just beginning. If you enjoyed this slow-burn age gap romance, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more heartfelt stories, and share this video with someone who loves a good emotional journey. Your support helps me keep creating these moments for you.